Hi everyone and welcome to my channel, and to this video where I want to give you some tips on painting animals' legs. Yes, legs. Because sometimes I feel like it's a part of some portraits that's a little bit overlooked. I often see portraits where lots of attention has been paid to the face and the main features, and then sometimes the rest of the body or the legs can appear a little bit rushed. Legs in particular can be quite tricky structurally, but sometimes they are the key to making your portrait extra realistic. So in today's short video, I wanted to give you some tips on sketching the anatomy of the legs and just in general how to make those full body portraits work. So I hope that you find this helpful. If you do, then please do subscribe to me here on my YouTube. And if you'd like to see even more, then check me out over on Patreon, where I have a full catalogue of real-time tutorials and lots more. Before I talk about colour and rendering, I wanted to chat a little about the sketching of the anatomy. Whether your painting is of a full body animal up close, like this big one here, or whether the animal is further away in a smaller painting, for example, this will really determine how much detail you can add to the legs. But in each case, getting your proportions correct can really make or break it. Because just like with us humans, the distribution of the weight really comes from the placement of the limbs, and it can really help describe the overall character of the person or animal. And when I'm painting an animal, sometimes their stance is key to showing their posture or even the action in the painting. And a large part of that is in your initial sketching process and having some understanding of the anatomy that you're seeing. Now I'll talk you through a little bit of the sketching process on this tiny little portrait. And now I find that the smaller the drawing is, the trickier it is to get it right because you have so little room for error. And you'll see that I do make some errors in this sketching process. But one of the first things I'm doing here is trying to find the shape on the ground between the paws. So I'm looking at the almost trapezium shape that we're getting between all of the paws on the ground, and that helps me to place the paws at least. And when I first start to sketch, I'm not worrying about the exact shape of each leg. My first mission is to get the actual legs placed, so where they come from the body, where the paw lands on the ground. So I'm not worrying about the wrist of the leg or the ankles at the back, for example. I'm more or less just making them straight legs to begin with and trying to get the placement of them, where they come from the body, from the shoulder, and where the paw should land on the ground. So I'm not the strongest, fastest sketcher in the world, believe it or not. And this is why I like to do my sketches on separate pieces of paper where I can mess about and rub things out and make corrections, which I need to do in every sketch that I do. And then I transfer that sketch onto my pastel paper before I begin the colour work. So I like to mess about with the sketch for a while. If I'm using a grid, that speeds me up a little, but quite often I like to go at it freehand. So you can see that when I got to a certain point in this sketch, I realised that I had made the body of the dog too long. So I tend to make mistakes in my sketches and figure it out as I go and do a lot of rubbing out and correcting. So here I'm just adjusting the length of the body, and I've completely removed the back legs, and I'll go at that again when I get the length of the dog better. So everything is being measured against each other, and I'm really avoiding going into too much detail before I'm happy with the placement of everything. And I'm always willing to get rid of it all and go again. So if I need to rub out a huge area, I'm totally willing to do that. So as I start to get the placement of the legs a bit better, I can start to think about the shape of each leg as well, and the shape of each paw too. So you can see in the photo reference that all 4 little paws go off in slightly different directions. And that really helps to describe the stance of the dog, so I really want to capture that. And then, of course, I'm thinking about the muscular shape of the leg, the back, the ankle here at the back legs. But only when I get the placement of the legs correct am I willing to start thinking about the detail on each leg and the shape of each paw. And it takes me a little while to get there. But the 2 things that really help me are thinking about that shape that we get on the ground between the 4 paws, which I'll just sketch in here now. You can see it's a kind of warped trapezium sort of shape. It really helps me to either imagine that shape or to draw it in. And then also the direction of each little paw. So these lines here just quickly showing you the slight difference in direction of each individual paw. So try to simplify the shapes that you're seeing and look for the relationships between the limbs using negative space, for example, before getting into smaller details. I want to show you a couple of my older paintings now and show you a few of the common errors that I used to make. So this is a really early portrait of mine, one that was done from really poor photo reference, very dark lighting, but all excuses aside, it wasn't that great, if I'm honest. And let's look at the legs, for example. They've got very little shape to them. They're pretty much like little straight tree trunks. And I've got some idea of the direction of the fur to try and give them some sense of 3D. But they're really quite flat looking. And the second thing that makes them flat looking is the lack of shadows. So they look really like they're floating on top of the surface that they're on. There's no shadows to ground them on the surface. And that's actually a very common mistake of mine in the early days, because these 2 are actually a little better. I'm starting to get a better idea of the shape of the leg and the anatomy, so the forearm area with a bit more shape to it. But what really stands out for me in these is that they're lacking shadows. So they look pretty flat. They look a little bit like they're floating on the surface. The one on the right is supposed to be on the beach, but actually it doesn't really look like those paws are grounded on anything. They look like they're floating. So I feel like while I got the overall shape of the legs a little better, I missed the opportunity to add those convincing shadows that really ground the paws on something and give the dog some weight on the surface. And that's the thing, really. You can draw the legs and the paws really well and still have it not look quite right. And that's because if you're going to include paws, well, then you've really got to try and attach them to their surroundings. Give them some weight on the surface that the animal is on. And that is why a lot of the time I avoided painting much of the legs, or especially the bottoms of the legs and the paws, often choosing to hide them in the long grass to disguise the fact that I couldn't get them right. So now I want to show you a few examples of different paintings of mine with different scales of animals in it. Some where we've got a close-up of the animal, so the legs are quite big within the composition, and others where the legs might actually be a very tiny part of the painting. So this is a great example of where I had a bit more space to play with in a slightly larger portrait. And I wanted to show you this one because it shows very nicely how I can use the direction of the fur to describe the 3D shape of the leg.
So I tend to think of the leg overall as being quite a cylindrical shape. And here you can see how the fur wraps around that cylindrical shape. And I can really use the curve of the fur to suggest the curve of the shape of the leg. And that helps a lot to create that convincing 3D effect on a 2D painting. And then, of course, it's fine to disguise the bottoms of the paws within longer grass. That often is the case. But the difference here is I've got good dark colours around the base of the paws to give it that convincing weight on top of the grass. So another larger scaled animal where I've got more space to actually add some sense of the texture of the fur on the legs. And I can use that to create all of the different ligaments and all of the structure that I can see on the leg, like where we get this ligament that twists around the front of the leg here. And we get one paw that is folded up off the ground, and we get the foreshortened view of that. So I'm putting a lot more thought and effort into the shape of each leg. They're not just straight up and down tree trunks. I'm really thinking of each curve, and I'm using the colours of the leg and also the colours of my background in some cases to help shape the leg nicely. And it's really the light and shade that I'm using to create that 3D effect. And that's never more important than on the tiny portraits like this. So a big difference in the scale of this painting. You can see how tiny this is in comparison to my hand. And I'm coming in first with the darker colours down the legs. And then I'm really making use of the highlights to pick out the shape of each leg and paw. Now, unlike before, I'm also focusing on creating really dark shadows right in at the base of each paw. And then the shadow gets a little bit lighter as we come away from the dog. But it's vital to get that dark shadow right at the base of the dog to give it convincing weight on top of the ground. And then, like I said, it's picking out those important little highlights down each leg that really help to create the sense of the anatomy of each leg. And that's why when I do tiny paintings, I tend to choose reference images that have very dramatic lighting. So I'll often choose an image that has these tiny little slithers of light just picking out the shape of each limb. And of course, on this scale of painting, it's a tiny little pebble of white pastel that I'm using here to pick out those lovely bright edges, creating the backlit effect. So the light and the shade are key to whatever it is you're painting, but even more so when it comes to legs and making them seem 3D. And just to contrast the little white dog, I thought I would show you a dark colour as well. These legs aren't quite as tiny, and it's a large painting, but I didn't have a huge amount of space here to add a lot of the texture or detail on each leg. I'm having to simplify it a little bit. So I'm again coming in first with the darker colours, in this case pure black, then my darker purples, and a lot of the main structure is picked out at the very end using my highlight colours. And you can see how just picking out those important bits of highlight down each leg and paw really brings it to life. But I think the main difference nowadays is that I will spend just as long on legs and paws and other body parts as I will on the main features of the face, because I see them as just as important. And if I want to create that full body portrait that has some convincing life about it, then I need to give as much attention to the other parts of the body as I would to the eyes or other main features.
I hope that some of the tips in this video give you the confidence to add those lovely legs and paws to your animal portraits. I love painting legs now, and with some of the tricks I've shown you in this video, I hope you'll give it a go too. And if you'd like to see more tutorials from some of the paintings that I've shown you in this video, many of them have full-length series on my Patreon channel, and you can actually browse all of the tutorials that I have available on Patreon via my website library at emmacolbertart.com. What you see here is a giant back catalogue that you can access for as little as €4 a month. But thanks so much to everyone who has subscribed to me here on YouTube, boosting me up and over 40,000 subscribers. I hope that I can continue to make videos for my channel, and I'm really grateful to all of you for supporting it. So thanks again for watching this here, and until next time, happy pasteling.